Now, let's speak more specifically to the history of this place. Remember those town blocks I referred to earlier? Well, those were subdivided into lots. Most of those lots were given to George's children. Well, it just so happens that Richard was one of George's children. And this house was built upon one of the 4 or 5 lots that was given to him. Well, you see, as a young man, of course, you were expected to learn a skill and a trade of some sort. So George arranged for Richard and his brother Stephen to go up to Pennsylvania. Richard was to apprentice with a potter, learning the potter's trade. Stephen, his brother, was to become a tanner, apprenticing with a tanner in York, Pennsylvania. Well, a couple things happened that really changed the course of history, really, for us anyway. Shortly after arriving, Richard had started work with a potter named Jesse Kersey. And all of a sudden, Jesse Kersey decided that he wanted to close up shop and leave town. I actually read part of his autobiography, and he said that God told him to close up shop, pick up, and leave to walk the earth to spread the gospel, the good news, of course. Well, I did a little digging and found out he was actually running away from a few creditors, but that's another story. Now, Stephen, unfortunately, had passed away during this period of time, and Richard, of course, didn't have much else to do. So he decided to fulfill his brother's obligation to the tanner. I think his name was Erman Updegraff in York, Pennsylvania. So Richard made his way over to York, and he learned the tanning trade. And upon returning, sometime between 1796 and 1800, he sank a tannery on the property that had been promised to him by his father George. And the tannery was just below the hill, at the rear of the property where the creek runs across, the old $40 spring branch. And we know he sank a tannery, and it's said that he built a house. And I actually think that the house, his original house that was built sometime around 1800, is now what we call the summer kitchen, or the out kitchen. And it was a common building pattern at that point in time. You would generally build, your first permanent structure was usually had a fireplace of some sort. And you would live in this smaller house, or this relatively small house, and until you were able to build a larger house, usually to the front or off to the side. Well, I think he lived in this house for about 11 years or so as a bachelor, carrying on his tanning trade, establishing himself as a business person here in the area and a tradesperson. And just before his marriage to Mary Peg Mendenhall in February of 1812, sometime more than likely around 1811, he built this larger house in front of the original house. And then upon their marriage, they moved into the large house, the new house, and then used the pre-existing house as a summer kitchen or an out kitchen, which is basically a way of moving the heat of the cooking fire out and away from the house in the summer months. It's hot enough in the house already. In the winter, by the way, they cooked just below us here in a winter cellar kitchen. They didn't mind having the extra heat coming up through the house. And if you look right over here, you notice how small our fireplace is. Well, there's a good explanation for that. Well, also, not only that, look how small the firebox is compared to how large the chimney stack is. It's quite large. That's because down below, there is a large kitchen hearth. And there wasn't enough flue space for a larger fireplace. In fact, upstairs, there's not enough room for a fireplace at all. So they would just sidle their bed right up to the chimney stack to get that radiant heat.